Hi, everybody. My name is Annette, and I'm an alcoholic. Um, my recovery date is November the 9th of 1981, and my home group is the Melbourne Beach Women's Group that meets on Wednesday mornings down here in Melbourne over on Satellite Beach. So if you're ever down this way, come and visit us. I want to thank my friend Christopher first, who I know somehow got me here tonight, and then certainly thank Stephen for inviting me. And oh my gosh, I'm seeing so many friends here. I think somebody squealed the word out there to somebody. I see my friends Pete and Catherine from Melbourne, and I know that oh my gosh, Edie and Melanie and Kevin and Rita. I'm not sure who all else is hiding back there on those other screens, and maybe they just know about this great meeting more than quicker than I did. But it's always nice to know you have a little support. Um, I I know now that the day I came to AA was probably the most important day in my life. I came here with nothing, and you gave me back everything and much more. I had no job, few material possessions, a car that either had no AC or no reverse in the transmission. But more importantly, I had no sense of self or personal identity. My family relationships were a mess. I was full of confusion about how to even live life and be a grown up. And my story will tell you how you changed those things about me. um, I grew up in an alcoholic home. Um, I thought that being grown up was having a well-stocked refrigerator and being able to say to you, "Oh, yes, what would you like to drink tonight?" And that was being grown up because that's what I grew up in. And my playground was the shuffleboard and the jukebox and the bowling machine at the bar because I hung out there while my parents drank. And so when I was about 16, I guess, is when I probably started first dipping into alcohol. I came out of an abusive household, and my mother was raising me by herself the last few years. And I'd always lived in a very suppressed environment and a controlled environment. And now she was either busy doing her own thing or working, and she had no time to watch after me and control me. And I all of a sudden had all this freedom that a 16-year-old probably should never be without, especially if they've grown up in an alcoholic home with no rules and regulations. So I got in a lot of trouble in high school. I was mostly running with older guys that could buy me liquor. And I remember the first time I drank alcoholically, I was about 16, and I experienced what I call a significant emotional event for a 16-year-old, and that was that my boyfriend broke up with me. And I stole half a bottle of Seagram 7 from my mother and got very drunk and got very sick. Now, as I've looked back on that in recovery, I've often wondered, how did I know that that alcohol would take away that pain? Because nobody'd ever said those words. I never saw a reflection of that in the type of bar and party drinking that my parents did. But somehow that 16-year-old knew that was how she could feel better. And that's when I think I got the idea that alcohol was the solution for me. I still, after I graduated high school, I married, had 2 kids. Of course, I married an alcoholic who probably also had other problems. And I didn't drink as much because I was raising my 2 children. And we got divorced fairly quickly. My kids were like 3 and 5 when we got divorced. So then my story became one of a single parent raising 2 kids and working a high stress job to try to take care of them and be an adult when I had no adult coping skills. I got married because I wanted to leave home, and I hadn't the foggiest idea how to go rent an apartment or have the lights turned on or anything. So it was just easier to say yes when he asked. And my mother always told me that I was in love with the idea of being in love. And you know, I can't tell you how long I was sober before I finally understood what that meant. She also told me I was too smart for my own good. And that one took a while in recovery to figure out too. And I began to see how that had gotten me in trouble over the years. But after the divorce, I found my way back to drinking. My neighbor was a barmaid and she kept wanting me to come down to this bar where she worked. So I did one Friday night. I went down and I walked in this bar, and it was a country western bar, and the country western songs were on. And there were those guys in their jeans and their boots and their cowboy hat. And I was off and running for about the next 10 years. Those country neighborhood bars were pretty much my home. And I placed my children in harm's way. I left them alone when I shouldn't. I sometimes avoided going home to them when I knew I should. I can remember stopping after work and calling them and saying, well, I'm just going to have a couple of drinks. I'll be home in an hour. And then in an hour, I'd be calling and saying, well, go ahead and fix yourself some bologna sandwiches for supper. It's going to be a little while. And then there'd be that third phone call, and it was like there was that voice in the back of my head telling me how wrong it was. But the powerful draw of that alcohol and that environment was so strong, I could not pull away from it to go home to my children where I needed to be. And they, of course, both grew up with their own sets of problems. When my son was just under 18, he had had several years of alcohol and drug problems. My daughter was a little bit of a misbehavior, but we always said she was too chicken to really get in trouble. So that kept her a little bit safe. And he tried to take his life for the third time. And this time it really seemed like a real attempt. Sometimes it had almost seemed attention getting. His father had taken his life when he was about 7. And it was like he had this fixation with that idea or something. And so my daughter was the one that was found him, and they got him to the hospital, and we took care of everything. And I got a phone call from a psychiatrist that was treating him. And I think this was the first of 3 epiphanies that I found my way to AA. She told me my son had an alcohol problem. And for me, the idea of those 2 words in the same sentence didn't even process. I'd never had any reason to see that my bad decisions and my inappropriate behavior was because of drinking. See, I was somebody who couldn't stop and have a drink and go home. I was incapable of doing that. Once I had that first drink, I was not going to stop until I found that absolute blackout, forget everything, get relief from the problems, and sometimes to justify misbehavior. I didn't know how to express anger or speak my feelings because I'd grown up in a non-feeling home. And so when I was really upset, my way of dealing with it was to just get really, really drunk and tell you what I thought. And then, of course, the next day it was, oh, I'm so sorry. I was just really drinking too much. And it was my excuse for everything, but I never understood that it had anything to do with how I treated my children, my money problems, my job problems, or anything else like that. So my son was put in a 28-day program, and the guy there sent us to a program that was especially for teenagers. One of the things I loved there was they had 7 steps. They didn't think they needed 12, I guess. But their last step was having received a gift of awareness. And over my years in AA, I always remembered that step. And if you ask me today, that's what AA has given me, is the gift of an awareness of how to find that spiritual path and how to relate and help my fellows and not live in a self-evolved world. And that was a phrase I really loved. So, I don't have a funny drinking story. If it's funny, it's only in how I behaved when I was really drunk, because I did some really crazy things. I can remember sitting down on the grass and refusing to go inside because I was mad at my husband. I can remember dragging him out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning because I wasn't done fighting. And some of those stories could go on and on. And somehow today, I guess one of our gifts is we can look back at some of that behavior and laugh at it. But it always reminds me too of where I came from. And my sponsors always told me the girl I used to be will drink again. And those stories remind me that I don't want to be that person again because I don't want to drink again. And so I continue to try to move forward every day. So, so my kids went in this teenage rehab, and the first 6 weeks they were there, they were taken away to foster home. And I only got to see them 2 nights a week at parent night. And if they'd done really well in staff therapy and all that week, they got to have a 15-minute visit with their parent. And this was probably about 3 or 4 weeks in. And one night we got a visit with my son, and he looked at me in the course of this conversation and he said, "But Mom, I don't understand. If I'm an alcoholic, why aren't you?" Well, I'd already had that little thing with the psychiatrist, and this was my second epiphany. It sort of went up over my ear here. It didn't really go in my brain, but it hung up over there and it rained some little sprinkles of thought down into me. And sometime in the next week or so, I had a fellow parent whom I knew was in AA, and her and I would sit and talk at night while we waited on our kids. And so I got in the car with her that night and I asked that magic question. I said, "Nancy, could I be an alcoholic? Do you have a friend you've just wished would ask you that question, that would give you permission to let them know they have a problem?" I just, we've often laughed about what must have went through her head about then, because I'm sure she'd already figured it out for herself. We just know these things when we're around somebody enough. But, she had this amazing way, and she just looked at me and she said, "Well, that's not really for me to say. Why don't you go to a meeting and see what you think?" And I went to a meeting that Saturday. It was funny, it was a women's meeting during the day on Saturday. And I walked out of that meeting and I knew something was going to change. Now, if I'd have known it was going to be me, I'd have probably run 100,000 feet in the other direction real fast. But I just had this, things are going to change. And I remember that meeting. I don't know why, I don't know what was said in that meeting, that it just still remains with me like it was yesterday, that 42 years ago. It was about expectations. And I walked out of that meeting thinking, oh, if I don't have expectations, I won't have resentment. Now, how simple is that? And how sad is it that I still have to be reminded of that pretty much daily? You would think something we remember that strongly would stay with us. But so that I didn't pick up a white chip at that meeting, but at that time I was married to my second husband, and we were actually sort of in the process of getting a divorce. And because of this program my children were in, he had already been 12-stepped into AA. So that night about midnight, I went to a meeting with him and I picked up my white chip that night. And like I said, my life changed, I changed, and it was the best thing that ever happened for me. And sometimes today, I don't know how I've been so blessed. But I asked that friend Nancy to be my sponsor. I'm very blessed. She is still my sponsor today. And I don't know how I got that lucky either. I think God knew that there was so much abandonment in my life that I needed somebody that would prove they were going to stay with me. And please don't misunderstand. I have given her every cause in the world to fire me, at least on 2 major occasions. And we sometimes can laugh today about that first one and how she just wanted to get rid of me. But at that point, what was going on in my life, she was all I had. I wasn't doing meetings. I was traveling a lot for work. I wasn't doing service. And I mean, I was hanging on to her. She was my lifeline. And no matter how hard she tried to cut that lifeline, I was just gripping on and she could not get rid of me. Well, I finally got that all turned around and got back on the right path after a couple of years of really put myself out there on that slippery slope. And it shows that my story is you can do that, but why do we put ourselves at that risk? I was very blessed. And so I got myself back on track. And at that point, I had been traveling a couple of places around the country for my job, and some opportunities came up. I relocated back to Florida, where I'm at now, here in Melbourne. And gosh, that was probably 25 years ago. I'm about 15 miles from the hospital where I was born. I'm a native Floridian and a native of this county. And I don't know if I'll ever leave here now. There's just something about the sand between your toes. And I do think the sun on your face in Florida feels differently. I just love it. And so it's home for me. So I came down here and I got really back involved in AA. Very early on, my sponsor and her husband and someone else started a new group. And I pitched a fit because I already had a group I really quite liked that night, thank you. And I'd been going to it for 6 months and I had friends there and they liked me, I told her. Well, that was too bad. I was coming to this meeting. And so I did. And we sat there week after week after week, 4 or 5. Oh my gosh, there's 6 tonight. Well, I want to tell you a story of hope if you ever want to start a new meeting. This meeting is still meeting in Sarasota, Florida, and there's 50 people at this meeting every week on a Monday night studying the Big Book and the 12 and 12. So don't give up, because that's the lesson I learned. But in the course of that small group, of course, I had lots of opportunity to be of service, you know, the key story, the coffee story, the secretary story. I didn't want to talk to people. I didn't want to get your phone number and call you. I didn't know what I was going to say. So I got the assignment to go out and invite you to come in and chair our meeting and to bring a friend. And we figured that way some folks would stay. And I had to get your phone number so I could call you and remind you to come. Well, needless to say, that lesson wasn't much more popular than the gratitude list one. But at that point, you know, I was at a stage of that early desperation recovery that we just do whatever we're told to do. And so I did those things, and I eventually became our general service representative for our group. And that introduced me to service outside of my group and opened a whole new world for me. And after that, just about always, I was somewhere with myself up to my ankles or knees in service. And I think for me, certainly that has enriched my recovery in ways I don't know if I could even describe it to you. So my sponsor taught me to go to literature meetings so I would know I was hearing the message of AA. And she taught me to go on a regular schedule. And when I lived near her, she did actually require that I go to at least one meeting where she was, because that way she could hear me share and she knew how I was doing. And today she can tell. All she has to do is say hello, and I say, oh, hi. Or I say, hi, how are you today? And she knows what's going on with me because she does know me well. And I value that gift, that she knows me well and that she can help me find the way still today when I need it. Sponsors are no good if you don't use them, whether it's a service sponsor or a recovery sponsor. And I've had a couple I've told, you know, if I don't hear from you in a month, then I'm not sure I'm sponsoring you anymore, because I know that it was important for me to talk and stay in touch, because sometimes I don't stop to assess where I'm at. I'm sort of going through life like a bull in a china shop. And it's those conversations with her that make me stop even and assess and realize where I'm at right now. Because I grew up in such a feelingless home, sometimes in the beginning, she would have to tell me how I was feeling even. And it could take me 10 days to give myself permission to be mad about something, because the idea of anger, I had been raised in such a, you know, keeping all that suppressed and under control. And I would have to preponder, oh, it's just me, you know, and over the years, she's really taught me much better how to handle those things. She taught me to live the steps and not work them. It seems to me like, I know today with some of my sponsees don't spend as much time with their sponsors as I did, at least. I mean, I hung out at her house, I loaded her dishwasher. I've grown up now, I haven't I allowed to or load it today, thank goodness, so I won that battle. But I mean, I went in furniture stores with her where I would never think about buying anything, it was so expensive. I would go in shopping dress stores with her that the clothes wouldn't even fit one leg of me. But that time I spent walking around and talking about life with her is where I learned those life skills I didn't have. And I learned about myself. I learned simple lessons. Like one time she was looking at a couch and I said, "Oh my God, I'd never spend that much for a couch." And she turned around and looked at me and she said, "Yes, you would if it was a printer for your computer." And she taught me in that one simple statement about priority and decisions and seeing that sometimes it's not that we can't have something, it's that we've chosen to have something else instead, and that's okay. And just simple life lessons like that she taught me along the way because I spent those hours with her. And I'm grateful she was willing to spend that time with me. We did work through the steps. I did my fourth. When it was time for my fifth, I knew, I hear stories about fifth steps being hours long. Well, I knew I had exactly an hour and a half because when I walked in, her husband walked out the door to a meeting. And I knew whatever I had to say or hear needed to be done in that hour and a half. And yet the great basic concepts that she taught me during that time, one I've carried with me forever is some of those things that had happened growing up that I could look back and think, well, I must have caused that because of what I did. And she taught me how a lot of those things when we were little like that, we're judging them as adults now. We're judging them like that child should have known what we know today. And that just became such a big lesson for me in letting go of some things and forgiving myself for what I thought was my part in them. And so I really appreciated that, but I knew going in the door how long I had to do it. So it wasn't something I was going to get to whine over. She's always told me that in the beginning I was a whiner, and she decided she was going to get me over that for sure. And so I stayed in service in the South Florida area for quite some time. And then I moved a couple of times and I eventually ended up in Georgia. And then I came back here to Florida. And when I came back here to Melbourne, I jumped back into service like just right away. And I actually started out all over again as the alternate GSR in my group. And I became involved at our area level, worked several chairs there. And I served panel 69 and 70 as our delegate for area 14 North Florida. And it was just, all of that was such an amazing experience. But I had to learn first a lot of things about recovery, obviously. Sometimes I've gotten a chuckle because when we get a year, we get that medallion and it says to your own self be true. Well, at a year, I had no idea who I was. And it's been a really long journey for me. I'm a slow learner sometimes. But one of my themes today is I'm so glad I stayed. Don't decide at 5 or 10 or 15 years you don't need AA anymore, because I've had such amazing lessons and epiphanies just in the last 5 or 6 years that I really would have hated to miss those painful experiences that taught me such great lessons. And I've just learned so much about myself today. And for the first time in forever, this past year, I finally feel like I really do know who I am and what my characteristics are and what my values are and what the things are I can't give up, because they will cost me my peace. And see, I didn't realize that was important, that I even had a right to do that, to say, I can't do that because it's going to disrupt my spiritual center. But I do have the right to say that. And I had to learn how to use that voice. And I got one of the places my service ties into my recovery. When I became delegate, I knew I had some problems with not speaking up. And I'm sure it came from whatever in my growing up, but it was almost like there were certain things, there was a cork at my throat and the words wouldn't come out. And when I became delegate, I made a vow to myself, you know what, these people didn't elect me to be delegate for me to go to New York and sit and be a wallflower. I need to learn to speak up. Well, let me tell you, when you ask for those kind of lessons, they're going to come. I got the roommate from hell for 6 months, and my son showed back up on my doorstep, back out in trouble, homeless, messed up with alcohol and drugs, and just a mess. And I let him drive me crazy for 2 years before I finally began to understand what I had done in all of my enabling over the years. And when I was able, both of those situations gave me so many opportunities that for survival, I had to speak my voice, no matter how hard it was. And I had a friend who would help me, and we would practice what I was going to say. But we just have to do that for ourselves, and we have to keep ourselves centered. And today my life is just so much more peaceful because those people that were my naysayers have been taken away from my life. Even if I couldn't do it, my higher powers have done that for me. They've brought about circumstances that people that weren't good for me just disappeared. And what a blessing. You guys taught me so much about spirituality. When I came here, I had a reasonable belief, understanding of a God, foxhole prayers kind of thing. I had grown up some of my time with my grandparents, and when I lived with them, it was church on Sunday school and church on Sunday morning, Sunday night meeting, Wednesday night prayer meeting, and usually a couple of weeks of vacation Bible school in the summertime. So I had this vague something out there, but it was very much a strike me dead if I don't walk a straight line, I'm going to get struck with lightning kind of. That was my image. And I found a book called Is Your God Too Small? And that book helped me. It asked you questions, what's your vision? And here's how to turn that around. And it helped me see a different perspective, and that whatever I wanted to believe in had to be everything. I wasn't letting it be omnipotent, and that I had to always be seeking. I wasn't going to look out there today and there it was. And every day I do things in my past to continue to seek, to make that bigger and broader. But you guys coming into meetings and talking about the miracles that happened to you, I had to borrow that faith in the beginning for myself because I had no real faith. And over time, you taught me how to carry that faith with me, and how to I just almost have a constant conversation today with my higher power. And I try to keep seeking to take that deeper and stronger in the time and the practices that I do. And it's changed my perspective, and it's taken away so much of my fear. There's a story in the back of the big book, and I don't remember the name of it, but it's about a girl who comes into AA and she's blind. And it tells her story, and then right at the end, it wraps up, and she's standing in the middle of a crowd of people at like an AA fellowship or party or something like that. And she's thinking about how her life is gone. And she describes it how all of a sudden she just has this deep realization that no matter what happens, she's going to be okay. And that's the way I'm able to live most of the time today. Once in a while, I can get all caught up and think I got to fix the problem. Some of my friends know a couple of challenges I've gone through this year where I just got myself in a tizzy because they weren't responding. They weren't answering my questions. They weren't fixing the problem in my timeline. And I just got all worked up. And then one day I just remembered that the big book says we will cease fighting. Everything. That's not just our spouse. That's not our boss. That's not the rain outside. That's everything that happens in our life. We don't have to fight it. And I just did a little surrender, and I went on about this other big project I was working on at the time, and I didn't call. I didn't ask how things were going. And within 2 weeks after my big event was over, two of the major things that were going on in my life suddenly got fixed. And it just was such a lesson for me. And now sometimes I've even been able to catch myself thinking about something and then almost laugh at me and say, I love it when I can laugh at myself. You silly girl, it's going to be okay. What are you worried about? And I just love that gift today. Or when I make a really big boo-boo and I can just laugh at myself about it and not remember how, when we're not perfect and we just want to beat up on ourselves, it's not worth it. Nobody's perfect. And if I'm perfect, it's because I'm not doing anything. And that's no fun. And, and I just love that today when I'm able to do that, to just laugh because I did something that was silly or wrong when I'm doing a workshop or anything like that. I sponsor ladies today. I love the ladies I sponsor. They teach me more than I could ever think about teaching them. And I have them at all ranges. I think my youngest is, she just turned 5 years, and my oldest is 44. So I have a very broad range of ladies and how long they've been sober. And, a lot of them, they're very little light maintenance, I'll call it. Even if they get in trouble, they usually call me and have the answer figured out. But, they've just taught me so much. The ones that stayed have taught me and helped me grow. And the ones that didn't stay have taught me that's okay. One of my favorite pieces of literature is a tiny little book called The Best of Bill. And it has about 5 of Bill's best, what we consider, I guess, his most well-read stories. And one of them is about love. And in that story, Bill talks about how sponsees, it's one of the few places I'm aware of he mentioned sponsorship, but he talks about how sponsees will come and some of them will not stay. And that's okay. It wasn't our place to save them, but it kept us sober. And then he'll talk about some will stay and they'll stay sober. And that's a wonderful gift to watch that light bulb come on. And I am really paraphrasing here, folks, I promise. And then finally, he says there'll be that sponsee that comes along who also becomes a great friend. And that is the greatest of love we can get in sponsorship. And that little, like, one page out of that book, I just love it. And I have sponsees that have fit all the realm of that. And I just think it's a great gift that we get to do that. And that in giving it away, we get to keep it. It's hard for me to sometimes to express what service has given me and how it's enriched my recovery. But for me, one of the biggest challenges, of course, is that it brings you in a deep process of collaborating with others. And sometimes that's a struggle. At least I know it is for me. Some of us seem to do it very smoothly, but I'm not one that can do it very smoothly. And over the years, I have learned a lot of great lessons about how to do that. And I've sort of come to develop for myself how the circle goes around the triangle. And I started in recovery, and I go around to my group and then around into service and the concepts. And things happen that get me in trouble, whether that's with other people or my ego or whatever. And then I have to come right back around to recovery to work that out. And it's like, to me, being of service, being engaged in the process of carrying the message at some level keeps me in that cycle where I keep revisiting recovery. I don't ever decide I've got it, because I know I don't have it, and that's not where I want to be. And so that's sort of how I've made it work for me. But I think my sponsor knew that service was a place I was going to need to be, because she sort of directed me there very early. And I guess the last thing I would talk about is gratitude. And sometimes it's very hard for me. Gratitude, Bill just wrote, there was just a quote of Bill's. Do you sign up for the Grapevine Daily Reading? It's awesome. Or do you listen to the podcast? It's amazing. But just one of the last few days before Christmas, it was his statement, how gratitude is one of the greatest characteristics of all, or something like that. And it has become my tool, no matter how much trouble I'm in. If I can stop and I can find some gratitude, then that takes me to acceptance, which then takes me to the answer. Because when I'm in that space of gratitude, then I don't have all that negative fear and anger blocking my way to seeing the solution. And I had a very quiet Christmas this year. Both of my children were out of the country and have been for several years, but I think they're both actually coming home next year. And so none of my grandchildren came. It was very quiet around here. And I actually said to a friend, to have the most alone, nothing less, more or less Christmas that I've had in like forever. I just was so floated in a world of gratitude for where I'm at in my life and the gifts that this program has brought to me. And I think that as long as I keep that tool of gratitude right there in the front of me, that's going to keep me out of trouble until I can get to somebody who sets me straight. I think about sobriety today. I do believe in going to literature meetings. That's what my sponsor taught me. I believe in being a sponsor and having a sponsor and talking to them a lot. That's a good thing. I loved how my sponsor taught me to live the steps, not think about it as I'm working them. And I'm being of service. I'm not working in service either. And, just that change in words can change my perspective sometimes if I think about it. But I think being of service at some level, I went off and I got to be our delegate. I lived and breathed service at our area for several years. Everybody can't do that. I had to learn early that not all my sponsees could be mini me's. There's a lot of reasons why some of us can't do those things. And to me, one of the enjoyments of sponsorship is sort of figuring out what works with this person that didn't work with that one, because everyone's needs are different. And I can't have a cookie cutter method of sponsorship. It just, for me at least, hasn't worked. And I guess I think I'm out of time. I'm pretty close. I would say the deepest thing I believe, if you're new here, or if you're struggling right now with something in life, sometimes we forget it's not just the newcomer that's in pain. But I do believe this: if you will come here long enough, and if you will do the things we do here long enough, you will change and you will stand in the sunlight of the Spirit. And that's the place I really love to keep myself every day. So thank you for letting me share my story with you tonight. It's awesome.